Hello everyone, welcome to my home office in this video about logical fallacies. The first thing we're going to do is read this claim in green, supported by an attempt at logos in red. Pause the video, read the claim, and write down your response to the support this attempt to use logos in red. I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. So what I need you to do is set aside what you just wrote, your response to this support, and we'll come back to it at the end of this video. So before we move on, I want to remind you of a couple of things about appealing to logos. In order to effectively appeal to the rational, reasonable part of an audience, a claim needs to be logically sound. That means it needs to be convincing, it needs to be valid, and it needs to be without any errors in reasoning. And this is important to you in your role as a reader and a researcher, and in your role as a writer. As a reader, what you need to do is be able to examine the support that your sources are offering for their claims and decide for yourself, are they valid? Are they convincing? Is there any problem with the reasoning here? And as a writer, you need to know that your readers are going to be doing that to you. So you need to make sure that when you support your claims, you're doing so thoughtfully and convincingly. So one of the problems that this person had is they had a logical fallacy in their reasoning, in their use of logos. And a definition of a fallacy is a misleading or unsound argument, any of the various types of erroneous reasoning that render arguments logically unsound. I love the word erroneous. You can see that it shares a root with the word error, and that is because it means containing an error. Now, what I'd like you to do is go to the class website or the schedule and find the chart that contains common logical fallacies. Read it over, and I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. One of the things I want to discuss now that you've read the chart is why logical fallacies are tricky. Like logos, ethos, and pathos, you've probably noticed that some of these words are in ancient languages. There's Greek, there's Roman. Why are these logical fallacies named in these ancient languages? Because people have been making these same mistakes in logic for thousands of years, because sometimes they work. Sometimes malicious people can convince those who aren't thinking critically to agree with them. Sometimes people with good intentions who haven't thought issues through can attempt to use these to convince others. They are in old languages because human beings haven't changed very much. One of the things you might want to do is look down at the chart and ask yourself, which one of these almost convinced me? Or are there any of these that I might have thought sounded good if I didn't know they were logical fallacies? So if you ever catch yourself or appear in a logical fallacy, that's okay. That means that you just haven't quite thought the issue through yet. You have an error in your reasoning, and now you have a choice. You can either fix it, or you can decide that the claim can't be supported in any other way. And if you can only support a claim with a fallacy, that claim must be abandoned. If you decide to fix it, you can do several things. The first thing is moderate your language. Instead of saying all people who listen to violent music are going to go on to commit violent acts, you might say there is a X% chance that you have found through research that people are going to go on to commit violent acts. Or there is a connection, and you can lay out what the connection is between the violent music and the violent acts. But as soon as you make that sweeping generalization, all people who listen to violent music are going to go on to commit violent acts. One person in the audience might think, I listen to violent music and I never committed a violent act. Or my friend listened to violent music and they never committed a violent act. You've lost credibility. Your ethos has been damaged. The next thing that you can do is give more specifics. This helps with proof by too few examples. allness and oversimplification. The more specific your research is, the more targeted your research is, the more trustworthy your reader will find you to be, as long as the research you are presenting is relevant to the claim you're making. Another thing that you can do, and this is something I've been urging you to do for the entire time we've been writing this paper, is to allow for complexity. Looking for cut and dried yes/no answers or good/bad answers isn't going to help you write this paper. So if you allow for the situation to be complex and examine it with that in mind, this will keep you from oversimplifying or giving in to either/or reasoning. Next, you can avoid common over-the-top phrasing. That example on the chart that said, people were born free as the birds, it's cruel to expect them to work. Free as the birds is a cliche, common phrase. Saying things in your own way with your own phrasing will help you to avoid that. And finally, we talked about ethos a little bit and how a logical fallacy damages it, but you can also avoid fallacies by keeping ethos in the front of your mind as you write. Try to build your credibility. Show yourself to be knowledgeable. You've done the research, you've done the work. Show that to your reader. Show your reader how reasonable you are, how carefully you've thought this through. By being a careful thinker, you're probably going to avoid most erroneous thinking. The other thing that you can do is think about so what and who cares. Think of the various people or issues who might be affected by your idea and think about them before making blanket statements. I think that this student didn't really think about the people who might be having a hard time passing the exit exam and not because of laziness. He didn't think about the big picture, and so there is a logical fallacy here. In fact, this is the logical fallacy of proof by too few examples. I know a few people who were lazy, therefore all of the people who don't pass the first test or don't pass the test the first time must be lazy as well. And that is erroneous thinking. Just because the people this student knew were lazy, it does not mean that other students didn't work very hard and fail the test anyway, and that they would benefit from the extra help that the school programs would offer. So, let's talk about two more example fallacies. Pause the video, read these two fallacies, and see if you can decide which types of fallacies these are. Did you decide what types they were? The first one, all people from the South are prejudiced. My great aunt was from the South, and she was the most racist person I've ever met. Now, an important thing here, and this is, by the way, proof by too few examples, this doesn't mean that you can't talk about problems of prejudice in the South. It's a real issue, it's a real problem, but you can't say all people. As soon as you say all, if you can think of one person who isn't racist from the South, your credibility is gone. So instead, you can talk about how it is still a prevalent problem in the institutions and common attitudes. Just don't say all. The next one is a post hoc fallacy, which is just fun to say. Remember, that's the after, therefore, because of. The new textbooks we got last year, that happened first, must have been responsible for the increase in this year's test scores. And the question I would ask there is, were there any other things that might have been responsible for it? Was it just the textbooks? Do we have proof that it was the textbooks that caused the increase in test scores and not a change in teaching, a change in class sizes? If you're going to say one thing caused a second thing that happened later, you must establish that cause-effect relationship. So to wrap up, as you do your research and you consume media, you're going to be presented with arguments that rely on logical fallacies as proof. I see them every day. They're not as easy to spot as the one I've provided you, so you need to be a savvy reader. If you see these fallacies in something you read, question them. Next class, We're going to be identifying different types of logical fallacies and discussing how to improve them, when possible, into logically sound arguments. I'll see you then.